My name is Josh Hickman. I'm the Forensic Scientist Manager for the Digital Evidence Section in the North Carolina State Crime Lab. And I am here this morning to talk about Android Auto and Google Assistant. And I know I'm the last presentation before lunch, so I'll try to do my best to get you out here on time. Real quick, before I do get started, I gave this presentation to our lab's administrators as a dry run, and I inadvertently set off a couple of Google Assistant phones during it. I will make a conscious effort to not say the hot word to trigger Google Assistant, but I may slip up and inadvertently do it, so you're forewarned. So Android Auto and really Google Assistant work together. The ability to have our vehicles interface with our mobile devices is not a new concept, but it's one that's really started to get into the mainstream. I bought a new car back in December. Android Auto and Apple CarPlay were a feature that I ended up having to pay a little extra for. So that is something that is again, not new, but really starting to get into the mainstream. So when we talk about Android Auto, what is it? If you're looking for a very elementary definition, obviously we need a device that can run Android. We need a car, and not just any car will do. There are some caveats there. I'll get to that in a minute. And Google Assistant, that's what makes the whole hands-free thing really work. And if you take all of those things and you add them up, you get Android Auto. And one thing to note, Android Auto may or may not be a default app on a device. Prior to Pi, Android 9, it was an app that you actually had to run out to the Google Play Store to download. I discovered that in Pi, that is now an app that comes in the stock image from Google. If you're looking for a more robust definition, you can really define Android Auto as a method by which Android projects certain application services up onto your vehicle's infotainment or telematics head unit. And don't take my word for it. Google actually considers it to be a projection because it's actually in the file folder name. This area is actually in the user data partition, so from a forensic standpoint, your ability to get to this data may vary depending on your tool's capabilities and the status of the device. Is it rooted? Is the bootloader unlocked? Is there a recovery partition there that you can utilize? I will tell you, for my test devices, one was rooted, the other was not rooted, but I did have TWRP installed, which allowed me to access this area of the device. So when we talk about application services, what are we talking about? The big things, I want to be able to make and receive phone calls while I'm driving, while I'm sitting in traffic and not having to hunt for my phone in the car. I want to be able to send text messages and have text messages read back to me for the same reason. I don't want to be looking for my phone or fumbling with the phone and accidentally run into the back of somebody who stopped in traffic. And I want to be able to do those things and not get lost, right? I want to be able to travel to my destination, not get lost. So the big three we're talking about, phone, messages, and Google Maps or navigation. But if you're a third-party developer and your phone, you feel like your app has got some use case there inside the vehicle, the Android SDK actually allows you to tool your app to be able to be used in Android Auto. So there are some big names in this space, Spotify, Apple Music, WhatsApp, and one that I actually don't have up here, Telegram, actually will allow you to use it via Android Auto. I found that to be very interesting. Waze, and then if you're a podcast person like me, I had Google Podcast available on the device. But if you may have sensed a pattern here with the third-party developers, audio playback, communication, and navigation, stuff that we've been doing in cars for a long time, just not in this fashion. So, like I mentioned before, not every car has Android Auto capabilities, and so there is support globally. 47 different auto manufacturers have various models in their stables that will actually support Android Auto. And again, most of the major auto manufacturers globally do support it. Now, one thing to note, The newer models will actually support these. So if you're looking at a vehicle 2016, 2017, that area, there may be very limited or no support for Android Auto. However, 2018 and 2019, there's ample support across these. Now, I actually wrote a blog post about this back in January, and at the time, the count was like in the high 30s, so 10 additional auto manufacturers between January and 2 weeks ago actually came on board. But if you have an older car and you want this functionality, you can actually go down to your local Best Buy or car electronics store and pick up an aftermarket stereo unit and actually install it in your car, and you will actually have you'll have this capability. And for those of you that are CarPlay people, the same goes. Most of the time, you'll find these aftermarket units will support both. So I just want to give a quick look around. This is the home screen. When you plug the device into your vehicle, there's actually two connections that need to happen. You need a hardwire connection, and it actually requires a Bluetooth connection to your vehicle as well. I'm not sure why that is the case, but that's what's required. If you don't okay the Bluetooth connection, it will not function correctly. But this is the home screen. As you can see, I've got some data sitting here in cards, the weather, and then it looks like there's some navigation stuff down there at the bottom. It's just like working in Android. This stuff is contextual based on time and location. So I took these screenshots at work in Raleigh, and it knows that anytime after lunch, I usually head to the house. Now that's my old address. I have moved since that, so don't come there looking for me. You will not find me there. You probably freak out the new homeowners. But it's pulling all that pattern of life data down from Google that's attached to my test account. This is my test account, but it's really my account. But all of that will change over time. Now, when I hop in the car, if it's closer to 5 o'clock and I hop in the car, it knows that I like to listen to podcasts, so it's going to put a card up there, hey, fire up Google Podcasts, and I'll queue up your next podcast there. The buttons down at the bottom are they're virtual buttons, and I'll run you through them real quick, left to right. The first one, navigation, and this is actually how it looks on your head unit inside the car. As you can see, I just grabbed some directions to Starbucks, and then down here in the bottom right is just the active navigation. Phone, again, number pad, the usual buttons that you see there, and it functions just like phone on the device. So I can loop a third person in. I can actually Google Cast the audio to a Cast device, which I found to be interesting. I don't know why you would want to do that. I can mute the mic, and I can actually pause the phone call if need be. There's nothing to put it, but the circle button in the middle is actually the virtual home button. It works just like the home button on your Android phone. You press it, you go back to the home screen. The headphones relate to the audio playback stuff. So just below Google Podcasts, Spotify is actually there, but the green dot indicates which app actually has control of the audio interface at the time. In this case, it was Apple Music. The last button on the far right, I call it the emergency exit. This screen will actually look different depending on your vehicle. The bottom card, return to Google. I was emulating this to get the screenshots, but for my particular vehicle, which was a Nissan Rogue, that card actually says return to Nissan. And what that does, it actually causes me to leave the Android Auto interface and go back to Nissan Connect, which is Nissan's homegrown software for their vehicles. The key thing to remember, though, is that Android Auto is actually still running in the background, even though you've exited the UI. If I need to come out of the UI real quick and adjust my equalizer on my audio and then go back into the Android Auto, I can easily do that. So what gets left behind when I use Android Auto? Well, as it turns out, not a whole lot. Again, because this is a projection, the apps are actually still doing all the heavy lifting in the background, and because of that, they're actually the keepers of the data. So, for example, if I send a text message to my wife on the way home, for example, there's no remnants of that text message in Android Auto. I just have to go to the Bugle database and pick the messages out of the database there. So keep that in mind. The individual apps are still the keepers of the data. However, there are some there is some data that is specific to the Android Auto usage, and I'll walk you through those real quick. So I had access to an Oreo image and a Pi image that both had Android Auto data in it. There is some consistency, and there is a subtle difference between the two. This is the consistent stuff, and I've got screenshots of everything up here, and we'll just, as you can see, there's quite a little bit of data there. And this is the Pi only stuff. Now, whether this is due to an update to the app, the differences between the OS platforms, or the specific capabilities of my device, I'm not sure, but just know that you could potentially see some differences there, so your mileage may vary. The first one, the time that Android Auto was last run, and as you can see, I've got the Oreo file on the left, the Pi on the right. All the timestamps are Unix epoch, so plug it into your favorite decoder and you've got your timestamp. The next is the Bluetooth MAC address of the paired vehicle. Now, you can get this from another source inside Android. However, if I just pair it via Bluetooth, in other words, I just go and get in my car, just hit the Bluetooth and pair it, and I do it that way, it will not show up here. The MAC address is registered here only when it's paired via Android Auto. This was actually an interesting find. For me, I was not actually expecting to find this. The car name there, Nissan, is actually the Bluetooth name of my vehicle, so that's where it's pulling it from. But there is a set of GPS coordinates in there. Now, the coordinates are accurate enough to where it actually got the exact parking space of where I parked my car when I got out of the vehicle that day to go to work. And I was actually really surprised by that, how accurate it was. And if you notice, there is actually an accuracy reading there, 3.0. It's, I don't know if it's like 3 millimeters, 3 meters, 3 feet, 3 miles. Probably not the last one. And that. So let's see. I'm going to skip through a few of these here. These are some Pi only settings. And I think the PowerPoint presentations are actually get posted online, so I'm just going to kind of skip through this real quick. And again, this is what it looks like when I get a message. This can actually still be distracting. So, it's Google Assistant is there to kind of keep your eyes on the road and off of this unit. So, again, this is where Google Assistant kind of comes into play here. I can summon it, it'll listen to me, it'll accept input, and it'll actually take action on my behalf and then provide feedback based on that action. And it may be able to accept additional input based on what I'm actually asking it to do. As it turns out, Google Assistant leaves remnants of itself behind on your Android device. All of this stuff is stored in protobuf data, and I'm not sure how I don't take the same view of protobuf data as some other people. I tolerate it, and that's about all I can do with it. But as far as Android Auto is concerned, there's actually stuff there that can be beneficial to you. This is where the protobuf data is stored. It's actually stored in the Google Quick Search box in the App Sessions folder. And as you can see, these were the screenshots that I took of the two devices that I had access to. The cool thing about it is that these protobuf files will actually tell you where they came from. So in this case, Android Auto is Car Assistant. Sometimes in these protobuf files, you will actually find audio data embedded. And it's just a matter of being able to go in there, manually carve it out, and then, for me, for example, I actually just stuck it in VLC player, and it actually played. I don't have time to do that, so we'll just skip the video. But I had a quick demo there, and again, this is the file that I generated during that particular example. The thing to remember about these files is that there's two things in here: the actual text of what I told Google Assistant at the time, along with a timestamp. There are markers inside of these protobuf files that will actually alert you to when you're getting ready to stumble across some text that a user spoke to it. It's a 9-byte string, and I've got up here in the screenshot, it's up there in the red box. But the cool thing about it is down there at the bottom, there's the timestamp. Being able to have know what a user told the assistant is pretty beneficial. If I'm investigating a traffic collision and the guy says, I sent a text message, but I had assistant, I actually now have a way to verify that he was in fact not using his phone and he was just barking at it while it was sitting there in his cup holder. I'll get to the file structure here. So again, because it's protobuf data, it is very unstructured. We don't have the proto file to kind of help decode it. But based on my interaction with several samples of Android Auto and Google Assistant, I was able to come up with a rough structure. The diagram on the left is just the structure of the entire protobuf file. But if you'll see there, the big purple block down there, it says vocal transaction. That actually has a structure all in and of itself. So I just wanted to highlight that real quick. The cool thing about these protobuf files is that there actually is other forensic applications to it. So if I have my phone just sitting on the desk and I say, okay, G, do something, there's actually a protobuf file that gets generated as a result. And the header indicates that instead of car assistant, it is now OPA. If I do a search via the Google quick search box, it'll say search. For those of you that have used Google Lens, if I just use Lens, you'll get a protobuf file that says Lens. So there's a lot of forensic applications there beyond Android Auto. And real quick, just looking ahead, if any of you guys were paying attention during I/O, you can basically take all the screenshots I showed you previously and chuck it, because Google has decided that they're going to change the aesthetics of Android Auto. This is what it's going to look like, and I'm not sure if that's going to change the forensic artifacts that are available. The other thing that they said too during I/O was that they're going to start pushing a lot of the natural language processing out to device on the edge. They want you to be able to use Google Assistant when you don't have an internet connection. So if that means that there's actually going to be more data in these protobuf files, is yet to be seen, but once that starts happening, I will actually be running more tests. Apologize for the quickness of that presentation. I'm pretty responsive. There's my email address. I actually do respond on Twitter, and I do have a small blog site, and the data for the Oreo Empire are actually available through that. If you want to download that, you can do that there and tinker with it as you see fit.
All right, thanks, Josh. Do we have any questions? Got just a minute if there's any quick questions.
As a simple question, isn't there any Bluetooth bandwidth problem?
As far as communicating back to Google, I don't know. I live in an area that has AT&T's fake 5G coverage, so I always see the 5GE stuff pop up. I will tell you that with the embedded audio data, there is lossy compression. So in my Oreo image, I actually did see MP3 data. With the Pi, you actually see Ogvorbis, which is another lossy compression. So it actually does get compressed down fairly big. The files are maybe a few K at best. It just depends on the session with Google Assistant at the time, but you really see no lag in there at all during the interaction.
All right, any other questions? All right, thank you very much, Josh. Sorry about the time constraint there.